International Conference on Effective Teaching and Learning. Kindly turn off your cell phones because it will interfere with the communication system, and stand for the Lebanese national anthem, and keep standing for the alma mater. Thank you. My name is Muhamad. I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. And on behalf of my colleagues at the Center for Teaching and Learning, the Office of Information Technology and the Communication Skills Program at AUB, I would like to welcome you to the 9th International Conference on Effective Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. The conference is a collaborative activity between those three centers. Before giving the floor to Provost Harajli to give a word of welcome, I want to thank him, first of all, for his continuous support, the keynote speaker, Professor Brenda Brueggemann, Professor of English and the Endowed Chair of Writing at the University of Connecticut, and Dr. Patrick Fitzgerald from the Olayan School of Business at AUB and the Director of the MBA program and Senior Advisor to the Dean. Also, Dr. Milton Cox from Miami University, Oxford, Ohio, who is a strong supporter of the conference, and this is his 7th year here. He comes every year. Also, I want to thank the conference program and organizing committee members who worked diligently for the past 8 months to prepare for the conference, including reviewing conference proposals. The committee included Dr. Amal Buzainuddin, Rayan Fayed, I'm not going to say Dr. Dorota Fletzer, Rana Haddad, Rana Al-Ghazi, Malaki Khouri, Zain Sinno, Lamia Hussaini. Actually, I want to, a special thanks to Lamia, who is really the logistical organizer of the conference. She does everything. Without her, I don't think we can do the conference. Also, the CTL Advisory Committee chaired by Dr. Lina Shwairi, the staff of West Hall, who also are amazing, the volunteers and the CTL support staff. It is now my pleasure to introduce Provost Harajli to welcome you on behalf of AUB.
Good morning. We have to have different sizes over here. Fellow faculty members, esteemed guests, AUB officials, and friends. On behalf of AUB, I would like to welcome you to the 9th International Conference on Effective Teaching and Learning in Higher Education, which is organized by the Center of Teaching and Learning, the Office of Information Technology, and the Communication and Skills Program at the American University of Beirut. This year's conference theme focuses on achieving equity in higher education, a topic that has attracted significant attention at AUB and at educational institutions across the world, and at all levels, varying from preschool to postgraduate. In pursuing equity in education, we recognize that our students and prospective students are not coming to us from a level playing field. They come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Some are the first in their families to attend university, and some are coming to us as refugees whose families and communities have been uprooted. Others come to us with challenges including physical disabilities, as well as learning difficulties, and students who need more help to succeed in an English language institution such as AUB. There is no one-size-fits-all way to tackle these equity issues, which is why we have launched numerous initiatives at AUB that are focused on equity, specifically focused on equity and diversity. I'll give you examples. A prime example is the Leadership Equity and Diversity Initiative, which is under the Office of the Provost, and today there is a director to this initiative. His name is Dr. Malik Tabbal. The vision of this initiative is to promote diversity and for offsetting inequities in access to transformative education through supporting the development of world-class graduates who will become the next generation of leaders. Under LEAD, we have a variety of scholarship programs that bring to us to AUB hundreds of bright and highly motivated students, all right, from disadvantaged backgrounds, not only from all corners of Lebanon, but also from the Middle East and North Africa. We have a new initiative or recent initiative to bring 14 female students from Afghanistan, again, fully supportive on scholarship programs. The University Preparatory Program is another highly successful effort that prepares undergraduates and the graduate students to successfully pursue their studies in an English language institution. Through a student-centered approach, the UPP, or the University Preparatory Program curriculum, incorporates study skills, cultural awareness, computer literacy, and the critical reading in addition to English language instruction, as well as science and mathematics as needed. This broad spectrum approach gives the students the extra boost they need to excel and to succeed at AUB. A third initiative related to equity is the Accessible Education Program, which is under the Office of Student Affairs. That program strives to foster an inclusive university community that welcomes, respects, and values people of diverse backgrounds, as well as abilities. We are proud to say that AUB has just started planning very seriously and sincerely to offer blended and online courses, as well as programs that will increase the accessibility of its quality education, especially for groups and individuals that were deprived from accessibility. For over 150 years, this university has been committed to providing educational excellence, but exactly what this means has changed quite a lot since the late 19th century. Educational equity is also a moving target, and like excellence, is not something we can ever actually attain, precisely because it is something we must continually strive for. This is why we must innovate and respond to the evolving needs of society in order to make education affordable for all, and also to produce graduates that can thrive and succeed. A broadly diverse student body, which we have been trying very hard for the last maybe 15 years to attain, means a richer and even more transformative educational experience for all students and faculty at AUB, as well as staff. We are very happy to be welcoming more than 50 researchers from universities in Lebanon, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, as well as the United States. Those researchers will be presenting their work. I also want to give a warm welcome to Professor Brenda Brueggemann from the University of Connecticut, who will give one of the keynote addresses along with our AUB's director of the AUB's executive program, a master MBA program, and expert on e-learning, Dr. Patrick Fitzgerald. And lastly, a hearty welcome to the hundreds of conference participants who have come from across Lebanon, the Arab region, and beyond. Welcome to AUB, and I wish you an enriching and productive conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Harajli, for an inspiring talk. Now, Dr. Dorota Fletzer will introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Brueggemann.
Thank you. Good morning. So it is my pleasure here today to introduce our first keynote speaker this year, Professor Brenda Brueggemann, who, as Professor Brueggemann already said, is a professor of English and the Etna-endowed chair of writing at the University of Connecticut. She also teaches at the Bread Loaf School of English in Middlebury College, Vermont, during the summer months. So Professor Brueggemann is originally a Midwestern United States farm girl, as she herself said. After college, she taught high school in her rural home community for 5 years before returning to graduate school to get her PhD from University of Louisville. In the mid-1990s, with the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, she helped conceptualize the new field of disability studies focused in the humanities. And since then, she's written, co-written, edited, and co-edited 16 books, including 9 memoirs and the Deaf Lives series she created, and over 70 essays and articles, all of those, or most of those, at the intersections of deaf, disability studies, and writing and art. Professor Brueggemann initiated a disability studies major and minor and a robust American Sign Language program at The Ohio State University, where she worked for 21 years, before recently coming to New England and the University of Connecticut. Her current research interests all center on disability and deafness in the visual and literary arts. She is the current co-editor of Disability Studies Quarterly, which is the first disability journal established. Professor Brueggemann has been deaf from birth and will be accompanied today by Audrey Silva, an interpreter of American Sign Language. I think we're lucky to have Professor Brueggemann with us today, and not just for this keynote address, but also for a workshop later on today. Please join me in welcoming Professor Brueggemann to the podium.
So I'm going to try again. Good morning. Thank you. Interaction is great. First, I'm going to say I have a couple of extra copies of the slideshows if anyone would benefit from having it in front of them to follow along. I also have one copy of the remarks that I'm making behind it. If it would help anyone to follow along, you're welcome to grab those. I'll lay those down there in case you want to get to them later. It is really a great honor to be here today, and I want to thank you for rescuing me from New England. in the United States right now. The day before we left on Tuesday, we got 3-4 inches of, everything was closed. The university was closed, shops, everything. They closed down. They call them nor'easters. Anyone here from that part of the country originally? Probably not. They're called nor'easters, the big snowstorm. So like 3 inches of snow followed by another 3 inches of ice and sleet on top of the snow. But we were able to escape on Wednesday, and it's really lovely to be here. I want to start by saying thank you for my lovely host, Dorota Fleshar, I think is how you say her name. And then also to my good friend and colleague, Audrey Silva, from the University of Connecticut, whom you saw standing here, for coming along and helping to facilitate communication between me and you. And I want to stop there and say a word about communication related to that. Don't be afraid at all to come up and talk to me. I'm deaf, very hard of hearing, genetic. It's genetic in my family, and I've been me from birth, so it's just who I am. I hear your voice. I have some residual hearing. So if I'm looking at you, I'll probably be able to lip read you fairly well once I know what it is we're talking about. So Audrey's there. So don't be frightened by that at all. And I'm a friendly person, too. I didn't learn sign language until I was 29 years old, so I know very much how to interact in the hearing world with hearing people. I also want to thank the lovely Itab Shuyab, who is actually from American University of Beirut here, apparently, but she's currently at my institution at University of Connecticut, which we call UConn, and she's doing a Fulbright there and focusing on the very subject of my talk today as well, on access, inclusion, and universal design. And so she actually created an Arabic version of the slides. So those are the two URLs. If you want to follow along on the slides in Arabic or in English, you can do so. Then I hope everyone, do you have note cards? Yeah? Okay, so I would say maybe about 4 note cards. There'll be a part here. I do everything interactively, so I'll be asking you for some things, to do some things with the note card. I also invite you, if you have a thought or a question as I go along, put it down on the note card. You don't have to write out the whole question, but kind of like a note about what your question might be about. And then when we get to the question and answer part later, that will help you remember, and it will also help me grab the context of the question you're asking. And just a warning, so you know, I won't be talking the whole time. You'll be participating some too. All right. So this slide is a slide that is full of text, and I'm going to read through it because it's the abstract that I offered for what I would talk about today. Here's what I promised, what I would do in my opening today. In this presentation, I ask how access can be imagined as active. And conversely, I ask how active learning can also make space for access. As college instructors in the 21st century, see if I can get this down a little bit. There. As college instructors in the 21st century, we increasingly recognize the importance of active and accessible engagement in the classroom. We are paying attention to how students engage with learning and writing, as well as who is included in such engagement. And for some good examples of that, if you don't, the United States, we have a thing called the National Survey of Student Engagement. Comes out every year. It's about a 60-page report. They focus on different things every year. It's about a decade old. But I find the reports, the annual reports they do, quite compelling about what we're coming to know about ways that students engage and access college education in the United States, at least. So several pedagogical moments lately, notably universal design for learning, and the best source I know for that is called CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology originally, which has been around since the 1970s, in fact, but none of this really caught on in higher education until around 1990. And the second major pedagogical movement is called active learning. And again, it's a thing that we began to talk about in higher education around 1990, a key kind of preliminary article from 1991 there. So these two movements have also worked to define and advance student engagement. And as exciting as these two pedagogies are, there's still much that we need to learn about how they function, especially when you frame them in ideas of equity and access for students in a college classroom. We still don't know very much about how they interact with writing as a tool for learning, which is an area I'm specifically interested in. And we don't know in what ways the two of them, they are or are not compatible with each other. There are two different kinds of methods of thinking about teaching, and people haven't yet been talking much about how they interact with each other, especially over writing. All right, so first I'm going to give you a little bit of definition of them. And I put writing in parentheses on the other slides too, because I'm not going to talk specifically about writing in this talk, but it will be the focus of the afternoon workshop. So first, to define active learning briefly. And now on this one is an image that was recently drawn by one of my graduate students, and it's meant to represent me. And there's a stick figure teacher, I guess that's me, with a pointer stick, although I never use pointer sticks. And on the desk there's an apple, of course, because it's a teacher, right? So the apple signifies that. And there's a triangle next to the apple, and the triangle represents a teleconference phone device that I use for remote captioners in my classroom who are in on the conversation and captioning the words to me on a teleconference phone. But they also put it there because this person knows that I love triangles. I like to think about things not in binaries or sets of two, but what happens when you triangulate things. It always breaks up a binary. So that's a triangle for me. And then there's my iPad over the right, which I use for seeing the captions, reading the captions that are coming in of the conversation, and also just looking up things really quickly. And the thing on the wall, she said, can be many things that I use: a whiteboard, a chalkboard, or an LED screen as well. So I take active learning from a concept that has been in circulation in the United States since at least 1991, but has bloomed now more colorfully and profusely in the last decade in higher education, at least in the United States. So just this year at my university, UConn, the Provost organized a large working committee on active learning and teaching. It's the first one. And this committee has been identifying the values and principles that we most want to engage with active learning on our campus, and also in specific classrooms of all sizes and kinds, and what we want to do to renovate those classrooms into active learning spaces. So here are two fairly succinct definitions from that 1991 higher ed study first, and then a more recent university website. Students must do more than just listen. They must read, write, discuss, or be engaged in solving problems. Most important, to be actively involved, students must engage in such higher order thinking tasks as analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And then within this context, it is proposed that strategies promoting active learning be defined as instructional activities involving students in doing things and thinking about what they're doing. So not just listening, but actively doing. And that's from the 1991 article. More recently, 2013, on the Arizona State University website, they simply say that active learning is an instructional strategy where students take an active role in their own learning and participate in activities and reflecting on their learning. So one thing that this looks like is a renovation often of educational spaces. One thing that I've seen mock-ups about what we're changing at UConn, an auditorium like this, I think seats maybe 100, 150. Do we know what the size of this is? 200? 300, oh, wow. That. So you take a 300-seat auditorium like this, and instead on the tiers, make the tiers, but create tables, a table, and put 6 chairs around the table in a U shape, and a shared screen or whiteboard at the end. So students are still facing the speaker, and they can still access the instructor or the speaker, but they can also immediately, very quickly turn and talk to each other. I mean, obviously, the space isn't set up for you to do things with each other together. It's meant to all come here and mostly to come here, out there, and not even necessarily to come back. So this is actually the new Active Learning Center in the first-year writing program. I wrote a grant last year to the Steelcase Education Corporation. Steelcase makes furniture for educational environments, and won the grant, and they came in over last summer and renovated this space that's meant to be used largely for first-year writing classrooms. Can I ask someone from the audience, can you give me a couple of things about describing what you see, especially on the bottom slide? Somebody shout out something you see in the bottom slide that you'd say about the room. Yes, thank you.
Some chairs are higher than the rest of the other chairs.
The high desk, okay. Somebody else, yeah.
Chairs can be rotated.
Yeah, good. Yes.
Looks like a cafeteria.
That's exactly what one of my graduate students said. And in fact, they were worried that because it was so colorful and cafeteria-like, that the college students would think it was, just like kindergarten. To which I said, I hope so, right? Because kindergarten's a place where we can play, right, for the youngsters. Yeah. So the colors. The colors, though, actually, the different chairs colored do different things. So a set of the green chairs does certain kinds of functions, and then that helps you think about arranging the room where the green chairs are together because they do a certain kind of thing together as well. So a lot of color. One thing on the back wall there is all the whiteboards. That's one of the favorite features of the classroom, because students can go and get the whiteboards and group projects and write on them and share quickly back. And they love to, you can see it up in that corner better than back down here, the big chalkboard, a big chalkboard that takes up a whole side of the room that you mostly use liquid chalk with. And they love to doodle and do artwork on that while they're doing art there, and we save it for a whole semester, and that looks really, and take pictures of it. And then the top image, actually, the graduate students that I train. So I train the graduate students every year who come in as new graduate students and for their first time teaching in the first year writing class. I teach them how to teach that class, I guess you'd say. And so they worked in this room all of last semester, and one day I decided to let them name the items in the room, give me names for this configuration or thing, and then also had to generate some things they could do with that. Here's just a couple of examples. The cubbies that have that cozy cubbies, they called that. One student innovatively said, that students could create like an artifact display of items, like a museum of Wunderkammer, and put that in there for that. The sensory integration area is where the couches are, so they can relax and engage their senses of that. The clover is the 4 yellow tables put together, and it looks like a 4-leaf clover when you're done. The place in the dark in the back is the gadget carts, all the iPads and the technology, and a little like a sound room, what do you call it, a podcast room is inside there in the dark. Okay. That tall table down there allows the chairs turn around completely, and it also allows people a full view of the whole room. It's one of the places we found that students like to go to first. There. All right. So that's an example. There's also a link that I have up there where you can see more about the room and things people have written about using it, some different projects and activities they've engaged in it. All right, now I'm going to turn to accessible learning, and I'm going to use the frame Universal Design for Learning. Is who familiar with UDL, Universal Design for Learning? Okay, I see maybe I'd say about 1/5 of the hands with UDL, which I guess is good. I was worried I'd be telling you things that you didn't know about at all. So UDL, On this slide, there are 3 blocks, and the first one that's on the left here is a Venn diagram of the 3 key principles of universal design for learning: representation, action and expression, and engagement. You'll hear more about those later, and again in my afternoon workshop, we'll unpack them a little bit more. And then the block to the right side demonstrates a kind of common flow pattern for UDL thinking. Thinking about what we want about learners, what do we already know about learners in their context, and then what are we here to do, what activity do we have, and how to identify potential barriers to learning, what will block the students from getting to that doing, and then identifying possible supports to get past that, and then using universal design for learning, thinking about representation, action and expression, and engagement to move through those activities, and then teaching and evaluating and revising and starting over again. And then in the very center is a very short summary definition of universal design for learning. It is an approach to a curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. I came to understand the intuitive ways that I had been practicing this access in my classrooms long before I had a name for it, when a colleague finally introduced me to UDL, Universal Design for Learning, now almost 20 years ago. And though UDL was conceptualized originally around teaching students with bodily and intellectual abilities and differences, what we might call disabilities, I have always, I think, understood its potentialities for also culturally open and diversely dynamic and inclusive classroom. We can't, I believe, truly universalize everything we do in a classroom, because universal does not always equal inclusive. Yet I also believe that if we work to proactively, before the fact, imagine how we can design a curriculum or construct a course or craft an assignment or create an activity or set up a discussion and respond to student work in ways that could optimize their learning and their access for as many students as we might imagine. Before we do it, then we've reached far and stretched hard towards inclusion and accessible learning. I mean, clearly what I'm saying, it's not about when the student with a difference or disability shows up in your classroom and you try to figure out now what you're going to do to get them in the classroom. It's about thinking ahead of that game. That's the basic principle behind UDL. So what I'm going to do today is just a small little, here's like a small rhetorical lesson. My PhD is actually in the field of rhetoric, the study of the art of persuasion across many cultures. And I'm going to put these 2 terms together. In ancient Greek, the term was called chiasmus, X. It's the Greek letter X. And so the rhetorical use of the term chiasmus means a crossing, an X between 2 things. And so what chiasmus does, first a little bit, is it's a rhetorical structure, persuasive sort of device that we use in literature and speaking that can be used to reinforce antithesis, the idea that 2 things might be opposite. But so in chiasmus, 2 clauses, 2 sets of words or phrases, or 2 concepts and ideas display what we call inverted parallelism. So by inverted, I think of it this way, is that parallel, like 2 lines, 2 ideas go that way. So when you do the X, you still have the 2 parallels across, but now they've actually crossed at some point. So they have a little more stick and bandwidth together. And that's how it works actually in our minds with chiasmus too. So chiasmus is actually very popular in literature throughout the ancient world. You can find it all over in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. It appears frequently in our core religious texts. The Bible, the Book of Mormon, and the Quran are loaded up with chiasmus. Shakespeare's work is very characteristically and cleverly chiastic. And the reason why it works is because the cross structure imposes the impression upon the reader or listener that now the entire argument has already been neatly balanced and accounted for. If you think about it, it kind of evokes a sense of balance, or also a sense of binary, so two things in some connection but different with each other, and it brings them together and bundles them. So here are two just quick examples of that from Shakespeare. But oh, what damned minute tells he o'er, who dotes, yet doubts, suspects, yet strongly loves. So what works there powerfully is Shakespeare's given you dotes, which is the same as strongly loves. It's just another way of saying it. And those two things are on the outside. So someone dotes. This is a double chiasmus. In fact, you dote on someone, yet you doubt them, right? And you suspect them, yet you strongly love them. And then the dotes, the suspicion, the love part is framed on the outside, and the suspicion is nested in the inside. And these are things that work really powerfully in our metaphor and our psyche. To remember the phrases, here's an example of one really famously remembered from Shakespeare that opens Macbeth: fair is foul and foul is fair. Switching them together, switching the two out. So that's how chiasmus works. And so what I want to do is put these two concepts, access and active, in chiasmus. On this slide there are three colored tabs, so access in the kind of cornflower blue over here, the X in the orange in the middle, and then active in a kind of sea moss green. And at the top of each tab is an empty circle. And I'm going to put these two in crossing. So if we have access, we think about access and learning, and we think about active and learning. And so far, again, they've been thought about as two different kinds of learning, but what happens when we cross them as well? So now a moment of audience interaction. I've left the circles at the top empty. Those were circles on the PowerPoint slide where I could put in an image as one. But what I'd like to know from you is what images could we put in here? So I'd like, how about people on that side of the room? If you think for a second about what kinds of images we might put up for access. You can turn, I'll invite you to turn and talk to each other for a second. A couple of images, and you're certainly welcome to use your device and actually find an image. Here more in the middle of the room, the X, a letter X. What do you think about when you think about an X, okay? And then on this side of the room, active. So I'm going to give you like 2 minutes to turn and talk to each other and be ready to come back and give some ideas of concepts or images. Access, X, active. That's why I said the room's not designed for you to talk to each other, but you will. Okay? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Hmm. field, yeah. So, all right. Hello. So a few observations from my perspective up here. I wasn't at all surprised. This room is designed for neither access nor activity. And so when I asked you to do that, I mean, it took a little bit before I could sense the bubble beginning to well up with people getting comfortable with that. I need someone to help me up here for a second and type in. So one or two of you, if you would come up here, you just got to type in some words for me. Come on. Don't make me pick on you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, just take one of you. If you're nervous by yourself that you won't get, somebody else can help you. You can come on up and help her. All right. So could we get a few things then for ideas for access? What kinds of images or things might go in that circle? That's what I want you to type. Okay. Computer, for example. It doesn't have to be from this corner. You guys. A computer. A computer. Okay. Yep. Increasingly. So, just so you know, just a recent figure this fact out. I don't like to pick books. This book is brand new. It's called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. It is so good about how to use universal design for learning. But there was one chart of this I was looking at on the flight in. There's one chart in there that now, in the last 10 years, students' use of, can you hear me okay, or do you want me to use that? Students' use of desktop computers in the last 10 years was high and now has gone down. And of course, their use of mobile technology has done the exact opposite. So that mobile technology now far eclipses actually their use of desktop technology. So the computer, good. Picture that. Some other image? We need at least two. Got to have options, okay? Another, yes, back there.
I was thinking of a ramp.
Ramp. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, what about the X in the middle? What do you think, what comes to mind when you see an X, other than the X? Opposites. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The crossing, right, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I always think about X marks the spot too, right? X locates something. Where is X? A place of something, yeah, right? You are here, yeah. Oh, good. Excellent, great. There's more back there. Yeah. So a meta thinking moment here. Well, first let's go to active, okay? And then I'll come back to what I was thinking about, okay? Active. What do we have for active? What kind of image could we put up in the circle for active? Students, yeah. Yeah.
We put students in a classroom with people doing different things.
Ah, okay. So not all just one activity, but various different ones, okay? Yeah. Which is good, because I actually tried to find that online. I couldn't find it. Group work, yeah. Okay, any others? Bridge across. I like that. I like that a lot. It's very, very sure. Okay, so one thing that happened in the middle, maybe not because there's more people, but it seems that the X was actually a little more powerful for us in being able to think conceptually. It's interesting, right? Because there's less there for us to hang on to. So somehow, and I think that's how learning also works, is sometimes it's easier to walk into something more when you don't have so much already in front of you. Does that make sense? I mean, you're kind of free to take that. Right. Thank you, guys, so much. Let me take this one down. All right. Great, I'll say those here. So what I also just did there was a thing that I do often, and again, I was doing it long before I knew that it might be coded as an activity that could be accessible and active. So obviously I don't hear so well. So when I need to ask students to brainstorm things and then bombard me back with the brainstorming, that kind of thing where they just give me single words often because I don't have context or clues around it. I can't tell hat from cat from bat without knowing, you know. So if you give me a bird, I know it's probably a cat more than a hat or a bat. Well, I guess if it's a bat, like the bat of a bird, but you know, it helps narrow things down. So I almost always ask students to do this kind of thing. And enchantingly, they seem to they get used to it and they love it. It makes them responsible for each other's listening in pairs and interactions. And then I don't mess it up either. But again, it grew out of an idea about my hearing loss. And for me, it's become a way of gaining activity in a classroom, of having them pay attention. All right, so this is just another diagram of what it might look like. There are two diagrams that are side by side, kind of look like linking chains. And I'm really interested in thinking on crossing how can we foster and carry out accessible learning that is active, and then how can we carry out active learning that is also accessible. All right. So the one way, now I'm going to engage with these two terms kind of in my own personal teaching life as a teacher, because I don't know how else to build theory without accessing experience and listening to narrative and telling stories. My teaching is characterized by a number of approaches and activities that I employ and invest myself and my students in. And I have written about these approaches and activities in at least 7 different publications, and most notably I would point to these 4. The first one, What Her Body Taught, or Teaching About and With Disabilities, which is now 10 years old, with my colleagues Georgina Klieg and Rosemary Garland Thompson. And that's the 3 of us in the image down there below in the right corner. Georgina Klieg is in the center. As you can see, she's considerably taller than I, or rather Rosemary. And we're in, and then Rosemary Garland Thompson is on the left in the white shirt. And we are in the corner of a wood-paneled room with a round table in front of us. And this is actually a restaurant in Dublin, Austria, which is a suburb of Vienna, and the restaurant happens to be right next door to one of the houses that the composer Beethoven once lived in. We spent 2 weeks in Vienna working on an art and disability project together. And what is not apparent in this image really is any of our disabilities. All right, so there's nothing in the image where you can see I had deaf. Georgina happens to be blind, but her cane is down underneath the table, direct gaze, you can't tell if she's blind. And Rosemary is missing most of the parts of both of her arms, which you can't see until I tell you that, and then once you start seeing it, you can see it. And so we wrote this essay before we went to Vienna at another time. And another one is called Coming Out Pedagogy with Deborah Modelmog. I don't have a picture of her, but it's basically about crossing the idea of disability studies and teaching and queer studies and teaching. So Deborah's specialty was queer studies, and we just started talking about things that happened in our classrooms and kind of crossed those two. An early one that's been reprinted many times over is called an Enabling Pedagogy. It's now 20 years old, basically. And then the 5-minute digital story that I created, which is the 5-minute version of my life story. I don't have to write a memoir because I did it in a video in 5 minutes. So that link is active, actually, to that story called Why I Mind. So on this slide is a circle cut into 3 pie sections: access in olive green, inclusion in light blue, and then active in the bottom in orange. Over a 32-year span of teaching in my lifetime, 5 of those first in a public high school, and now 27 of those as a university faculty member, access, inclusion, and active has become my teaching triumvirate. They triangulate my day-to-day classroom interactions with students as much as they also motivate the work I have done and still do in curriculum and program development and oversight. So it's not just what I do in the classroom, but how I think about building a curriculum like a first-year writing program across the university. Oops, back. So this slide has an image of a black notebook with the white words teaching philosophy on it. And on top of the notebook are a few silver paper clips and 3 white pencils down in the corner. So here's an example of what I mean by that kind of teaching. It's one of my long-standing and joyful jobs as a director of a university writing program is to train the new graduate instructors to teach, and often for the first time, in our required writing courses on campus. Are writing courses required at AUB? Yep. Yeah, it's pretty much a standard American university. So every fall for 18 years now, I have asked the new graduate students who are beginning their teaching careers in first-year writing to close out that first semester by composing a teaching philosophy statement. How many of you have such a thing? A teaching statement, a teaching philosophy? Around half of you in the room. It's usually not something we do in our first semester, because like, what do we know, right? And that's what they say to me, what do we know? And make it a try. And so I asked them to close out their first semester. So it's a draft, I emphasize. And I also make the assignment request with the summer graduate students I teach at the Breadloaf School of English, who are middle and high school teachers that come from all over the United States to work on their master's degree courses. And now those are usually seasoned teachers. And most of them, high school teachers, they actually haven't written one of these yet themselves. And so no matter whether it's the first-year teachers or the seasoned high school teachers, the response is usually the same. They groan, they gnash, they swoon, they resist, and then they do it. So those of you who've written one, it's not an easy thing to do, right? Yeah. It's always a little hard to talk about your teaching. And so it often helps when I put my own vulnerable teaching philosopher self out there as a model for them. And in keeping it active and fresh, I demonstrate a draft that usually first takes on a non-conventional approach. So I do this along with them, but instead of actually writing a statement, I create my first draft by doing something different or multimodal. So, for example, in the summer of fall of 2016, I made a Spotify playlist of songs that harmonized with elements of my teaching approach. And I accompanied that with a found poem by taking lines out of those songs and remixing the lines into a poem. I did that also because people tend to think, I'm deaf, I don't listen to music. I do have some hearing loss. I do listen to music, probably louder than you like. In an environment. And I grew up with my sisters, my 2 younger sisters, always writing out the lyrics of songs for me. This was before there was YouTube and you could get all the lyrics on there. So once I have the lyrics and can catch the beat, I pay attention to beat an awful lot in a song. As well. So just a couple things where you can see the playlist starts out with a song by George Michael, also known as Boy George, called One More Try. And then I do the cover version of it by a country singer, Leanne Rimes, One More Try, because that's the idea, one more try, and then another singer gives it one more try, and that's what teaching is about as well. And then in the summer and fall of 2017, over there on your right, I went more visual and I created a sequence of GIFs and memes. And this is the one that ended, and it's an actor, his name is J.K. Simmons, who's been made most famous in America by his performance in the farmers' insurance companies. I don't know what you see, but the insurance companies in the United States love to do commercials. All the 3 major ones have a lot of commercials. But the farmers' insurance commercials, and they usually tell some story of some crazy insurance disaster that happened to a home or a car. And then he ends it by saying, and that's how you do it. And so that was my last slide, that's how you do it. And then finally, the most recent one, I honored one of my favorite American poets who had just died the summer before, John Ashbery, who was actually the poet laureate of the United States for a couple of years, and I remixed one of his signature poems, which is called My Philosophy of Life, and I made it My Philosophy of Teaching. So it would go like this: just when I thought there wasn't enough room for another thought in my head, I had this great idea. Call it a philosophy of teaching, if you will. Briefly, it involved living the way teachers live, according to a set of principles. Okay, but which ones? Well, that was the hardest part, I admit, but I had a kind of dark foreknowledge of what it would be like. And the poem goes on like and whimsical, and I remix it with students and teachers in there the whole time. So again, back to access, active, and inclusive, the three parts. So my point in the example that I just offered here is that you take hard academic work, writing a teaching philosophy statement as a new teacher, trying to make it more accessible, less daunting, at least for the first draft in generative engagement. If you try it out in a way that's a little bit more play, it can help you get to what the real ideas are that you need to communicate in conventional writing. Also about making it more inclusive by including forms and possibilities for just the otherwise rather dyed-in-the-wool teaching statement. And then more active and engaged, at least again in the first draft, by challenging myself to do it differently every time, and also challenging the student teachers to bring serious whimsy and then studious play to the task. Access. Oh, on this slide is access, and I have Cinderella's slippers. I have to confess, I had a moment I puzzled over this slide for a long time, because you never know culturally. I grew up with Cinderella. You know, I was Cinderella for several Halloween costumes in a row, I remember, and my grandmother made the dress for me too. And so for me, access functions as a fairy godmother, like in Cinderella, of meaningful education. She wields her magical powers to make the glass slippers of learning fit best and to shape the learning story towards best possible endings, happily ever after. But because I can't also expect that you all will easily understand my Disney film and classic fairy tale allusion, I'm just going to be more direct here, less metaphorical. Access simply grounds my teaching. And it does so also by using collaboration as a method. So here's the same pie chart image with access, inclusion, and active, and then collaboration and interdependent is laid across it. I often work to extend the ideas of inclusion and reach through active and deeply valued collaboration, asking students in my class to not just talk together, but to do and create and to be together. And I also direct academic programs and carry out most of my own research projects in these ways with collaboration as the center. So Dorota mentioned items on my CV. One of the things I think I'm most proud of about my academic career is 75% of the material on my academic CV, my resume, is collaborative with other people, with other colleagues that I write with my students, so presentations and collaboration. One of the primary insights that disability studies scholars have brought forward is the very human reality of interdependence. Not independence, not dependency, but interdependent, that we as humans are exquisitely interdependent on each other. And this is, of course, always a real challenge in a country, my home country, where, you know, the primary charter of the country is the Declaration of Independence. So I think that I always understood this intuitively as a young deaf girl, knowing that I would need to get by with a little help from my friends from time to time. And then I took that knowledge and I applied it actively to my access and education in the world at large. So in my classrooms now, for example, students just don't actively engage and collaborate with each other, but they collaborate with me too. As you just saw up here, asking them to help in the note-taking part. I often ask students someone says something, and I probably might have heard it even through the captioning, but I often ask the student to paraphrase what another student said. And so it begins to make them think about listening to each other, a thing that they don't often do, and being responsible, ethically responsible for each other's words. And as you saw, also taking charge of the PowerPoint and the note-taking. All right. So here's an orange triangle, and it has you at the top, and then it has active and excess and white blocks below that. So it's time for me to stop talking about me, and I'm going to talk about you. So you as a learner, as a student, and then also you as a learner, as a teacher. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes here. You have those note cards, and you can talk with your neighbor, put something on a note card, if you like. But my first question to you is, and so choose your mode. If you like talking to people, turn and talk to somebody. If you like just doodling notes by yourself, just do that. Write down a couple things, or say a couple things. How do you learn best? What are the things that help you learn? What do you know about yourself as a learner? What are the best ways for you to actively engage learning? I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. You as a learner. Okay, let's switch frames a little bit and think about how you teach the best. One thing that the literature shows us over and over again is that teachers often teach how they were first taught. So that the student part of you often carries forward into the learner part, and or how you first engage teaching, wherever you first learned to teach from, so breaking patterns. So I'm interested to talk to each other just a second. How do you teach the best? What are the things that happen? Like, is there a certain kind of teaching space that feels really good and right for you? Are there certain kinds of moves that you go to again and again for putting together an activity or a classroom? Talk with each other or just yourself on the note card. How do you teach best? That's part 2. There's one more part coming. All right, are you ready for part 3, the last part? So there's probably some connection between those two, probably some differences, and some others that carry over. But now I want you to take the ideas of active and access and lay those on top of those. How does the idea of active teaching or learning fit in anywhere on what you have there, have written down or spoken about with your friend? And how does access also play a part? So just 2 minutes for that, and then we're all going to come back together. Active and access.
Well,
I'm going to hand this to you because I am overhearing what you're talking about, and I'm sure that the rest of the audience would as well.
Okay.
So I'll hand this to you.
I'll tell you how it works.
Oh, no.
Next year.
So I'll hand this to you
Okay.
to be the first commenter. I'm putting you on the
my.
spot.
Oh.
And then we can take turns handing the mic around. Let me see. Testing. Yes, it is on.
Okay. Okay.
And I apologize for putting you on the spot. It's my job.
Here, I got it. Have a little bit of movement here. So again, interesting, you all were talking a lot more on the third one. So I'd like to spend 5 minutes together with just a couple of the things that emerged from that conversation. You as a learner, you as a teacher, and then where active and access fit in. And then I have a closing move with the UDL film and a challenge for you at the end. Okay. You have the mic, so you're going.
Okay. I feel very humbled to be asked to do this. I'm Catherine. I used to work at AUB, and I have co-founded a new Center for Learning at Purdue University. With the concept of access, what I'm doing this year with my students, and we'll see how it works. I'll tell you next year. I'm trying to give them permission to fail. I teach I'm engineering and science students. I borrowed this concept from Elon Musk that if you're not failing, you are not able to innovate, and they need to learn how to innovate. Yeah. So I told them, you get an A in this course. I want you to know you have an A. You don't have to worry about the safe learning. I want you to have permission to do something stupid and have it maybe be creative and have that safe space to be creative. Now, I can't promise this is going to work. I'm just trying to make that a safe space for them to learn. So we'll see. I'll let you know next year.
Okay. Great. Yeah. I think that's what we call in UDL, it's like a +1 approach. There's always thinking about a +1, what other thing you can add on now when this thing might actually happen to fail, already having like the +1. Yeah. Someone else?
I'm happy to run the microphone
Please.
out to whomever might want to comment.
Please, 3 people. Come on. Yeah.
One moment.
The mic's coming to you.
Students to
Because they won't
think
hear
always يعني different issues, opposite issues, dichotomy, 0 or 1, and it works.
Okay. Yeah. Between the two. Someone else? An insight? I think she had her.
Thank you for your patience with me running
One
around.
more person. One more. Right there. Audrey's getting her steps in today.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I really would like to thank you about putting the first question and the second question together. You know,
Yeah.
I've been in the teaching profession for a long period of time, and I just realized that the way I teach is actually the way I used to learn, and I've also been learning all my life. Okay, now, I usually start raising questions, and then we talk about them. Then we, after the discussion, I introduce certain concepts, and then we try to apply. And then I leave the class with a projective type of questions for the students to think about, and we'll bring it to the next lecture and try to answer it. So the best thing for me, you know, even when I was myself a student, I usually read, think, try to find connections, and then write about what I have learned. And this is exactly what I do even now with my students. And you know, I come from a culture where students are used at taking but not giving. So I start my semester telling my students, you've got to earn it, and you've got to do it. Okay, and we're doing things all the time. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, it's something actually people don't ask students very much, right? How do you learn? What things help your learning overall? There you go.
Hello. What I do with my students usually, I encourage them to make mistakes. I always let them know that making mistakes or errors is fine. It's not about the grade, it's about the achievement that you make by the end of the term.
Great. Yeah, not mistake-oriented. There's one more right down here.
Thank you. About how do you learn the best is usually by using colors. Usually my text is really full of colors, and this is the way I also teach students, by asking them to take any text and try to turn the text into a drawing. And then ask each student to criticize the drawing and to see if they got the message, if they understood from the drawing. It's never about it's never about presentations, never.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I can't draw at all, but if you make me draw, I find I've often really learned things because I have to think so hard about the drawing.
Hi. In addition to what my colleagues already mentioned, I usually turn a learning objective into a game challenge, and I let the students find the answers through plays or challenging each other through using technology applications like Socrative, Quizlet, Kahoot, etc.
Great. I love this magic, so when the hands start popping everywhere, go ahead. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Where possible, I try to have students answer these questions for themselves rather than have me decide for them. One of the best finals I've ever given was a semester of content and information. And then I asked the students, demonstrate to me that you have learned this in the way that you feel best demonstrates your ability. And then you let the plurality carry the day. These were some of the best finals I had ever seen from students.
Yeah, show me.
Can I say something myself? Actually, when I looked at those questions, I found out that I do active, but I have never thought about access very carefully. You know, I've thought about activities and things that challenge the students. However, I have not thought about that this may not be not accessible to all the students.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. So what I'm going to do now, to close this out. This slide is full of things. I'm not going to go through everything here because conveniently I have a 4.5-minute film from the Center for Applied Special Technology, which is the best thing I know of out there that tells us about UDL at a glance. But these are the major frames for universal design for learning, okay? It's providing multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression for work you do in the classroom. And what's here on the slide is science, folks. It's neuroscience. So this has actually been cognitively, neurobiologically proven now that these are different networks that happen in the brain, and the best thing you can do is to try to tap in to each one of these networks across your classroom. So let me roll the film for 4.5 minutes, and then I have a closing challenge for you, and we'll see if there are any questions or thoughts left. Let me see if I can.
And a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better.
This is not my machine, so.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal design for learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal design for learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning. Curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interests and autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways, allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.cast.org.
So, I'm at an end. This is the challenge that I'd like to leave us with over the next couple of days, is as we go about our encounters over the next couple of days and you go to different sessions, is to kind of keep notes on where active and access is happening or how you can see it happen even more, and offer a few notes back. So I've opened up a document, a shared Google Doc, if you want to put it there. I don't know if you guys are tweeting the conference. You could also, if there is a Twitter feed going on, we could also put it in the Twitter feed. But if you'd like the document, or send it to me if you don't want to put your name. You don't have to put your name with what you see. But the idea is to kind of consciously think over the next day and a half here how we're seeing active learning and how we're seeing accessible learning happen. And that's all I have for you, but I would love to have a little discussion for the remaining 5-10 minutes we have before we get more coffee or food. Questions, comments. You don't even have to ask about the presentation. You can ask about anything, like the weather. Yeah. You get her.
I just wanted to ask if you can list 3 strategies you utilize to overcome hurdles in communicating with students first, and starting this new wave of what you believe in, of how teaching should be.
Okay, so you want 3 strategies?
Yeah.
And you want 3 strategies that I use in general in teaching?
Yes.
To like think about barriers that are there?
Mainly barriers and how you were able to overcome them.
But you want my personal barriers?
No, not your personal.
Or what I do in teaching? Okay, right, I'm just trying to get the right. Yeah. Well, and I'm going to actually use this presentation, I guess, as an example for that. So one is that I really had no idea who the audience was going to be for this conference until maybe a week or so ago, when I got a list of participants in the workshop and I first saw the program go up online. So it was hard to imagine where people would be coming from, and who they were, what academic skills you'd be bringing to it, what parts of the world you might be coming from. So even things like, I had to think, so Cinderella, a kind of cultural thing, but it's a metaphor that really works for me, but how well will it translate? So while I wanted to use Cinderella because it has some deep resonance for me culturally, but then I kind of backed out and said, but here's the direct line, just access. So thinking already, and this isn't even about disability, but that there are going to be different people with lots of different experiences who might be in your room, in your classroom, and you can't guess what they are, but again, thinking ahead of time about the fact that that's going to happen. Here's another really specific one, actually for me, is that I know that I am a visual learner. which is kind of ironic that I ended up being an English professor and a writer who loves words and lives for words. And in fact, reading, the access through the book was, my primary access. Like I said, a book never cared. When all my family or people, I'd ask them to repeat things, they'd always say, oh, never mind, because that trouble. But a book never did that. In fact, a book wants you to say, a book wants you to reread it and keep asking again and again what it means. So I know I'm a really visual learner, I prefer, which means I love to do visual stuff. But it's not just that people are blind or vision impaired, but some people just don't do well with visual things. And I put up something visual, and it just has all this meaning behind it, just one simple image and cleverness, but it doesn't translate that way, like Cinderella's glass slippers. Even if you know about Cinderella, or they don't like that story, has different emotional valences. And I think that's the third one, I'd say, is emotional feelings. Okay, so what context people bring, who they are, their experiences before. Second, thinking about you tend to go towards, that's why I asked you the students first, you tend to go towards, as a teacher, the strategy that you most grab a hold of as a student. That doesn't work. And then the third one is that people have feelings about things that they don't often even necessarily know are happening in the classroom, right? Yeah. Like the Cinderella story.
Hello, please,
Okay.
I have a question.
Do I get an A?
Yes.
For my answer?
Yeah.
Good.
So this curriculum is designed for all types of learners, like average students, students with learning difficulties, and even gifted ones. Because I had the impression that this is a curriculum designed for students coming from different, let's say, contexts or backgrounds, or like you said, different levels of feelings and emotions. Different types of learning, visual or auditory learners. So does it accommodate all types of learners, including students with learning difficulties, average and gifted ones? Thank you.
I think what I'm going to say back is that when I read the literature, it's amazing to me that both UDL and active learning are concepts that have been around for far longer than right now. And when I asked, even a number of you didn't actually know the terms or the frames. They've been used in education before higher education for quite some time. But we're only just catching a hold of them in higher ed. And they actually write about that really well. Yeah. Do what? Yeah. Yeah. So using online stuff? Oh, yeah. 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 Well, I think it's reversal. I think it's also, we expect college to be kind of hard. And so there's a way we, even sometimes unintentionally, build in barriers to college education because it's supposed to be a little bit hard for people to be here. So not to help them along. It's also the case that those of us who teach in higher ed, partly how we got to be to this place because we were pretty good as students. And so it's hard for us to wrap our head about that. That doesn't work that way for all those students in our room. Get out of there. I always say that with the English graduate students who are going to teach writing for the first time. Most of them didn't have to take a college writing class themselves because they were good enough writers that they tested out of that. And now here they are going back to teach it. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Hi. What do you think of differential learning applications and softwares? Do you think they can help us meeting the different needs?
Okay, so I'm going to have to say, so you about meeting their needs?
with differential applications and software.
Mm-hmm.
Like many publishers are using now.
So I certainly have nothing against software, technology that will help meet the needs. And I have nothing against offices for disability services on campus. I would never take any of those away. But one of the things that happens is it puts the responsibility back on them or on the technology. And I say, so like wearing a hearing aid, so I can wear a hearing aid, that will help me, but I'm still deaf, okay? With or without the hearing aid. And when that technology messes up, and it's going to, there I am again, back at square one, unless I have strategies or unless the people I'm working with have also adopted strategies. So I think, and that's one of the big things about universal design for learning. It's okay to use the technologies, the computers, do other things, but also think about what's happening in the actual learning exchange that can be changed.
So maybe the care that a person can give to individual students, the actual care. Right.
Right. Yes. Right. Because education and learning is about a relationship between people. So it's not about the relationship with the technology. Okay? I think that's it. Unless you got one more.
One more question.
I'm conscious I don't want to keep you guys any longer.
Yeah, I'll make it
that,
brief.
so.
I'll make it brief.
Yeah.
I think it's related to the question the lady made earlier about accessibility in relation to, well, it's mostly definitional question. One of the
Definition question?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. One of the major tenets of universal design for learning seems to be education for all. My question is whether education for all includes just people that are in the academic institution. For example, does it include people who don't have access to education? Does it include differences between gender in learning? Does it include accessibility of people with weaker backgrounds? For example, in Lebanon, we have, at our university, we have students coming from very strong backgrounds, very good high schools, and those coming from much weaker high schools. So how limited is the term? Does it just include physical disabilities, or is it more general to include all sorts of other learning, such as online access, open access learning, etc.?
Yeah. So the CAST organization saying on their website is when learning has no limits. And I do cringe always about that. I was supposed to cringe a little bit over the word universal, the idea that there's some, but everything that's written about universal design, they borrowed the idea from universal design in architecture, which was a really cool idea that worked really well and still does, right? And then applied it to learning. It doesn't translate as well. And I'm going to go back to like what you're saying about the connection between your two questions. I think that's what we have to ask ourselves, if in fact we believe that higher education is something that should be available for all. I do. I can tell you, my guess is probably 70% of my colleagues at my own university don't necessarily believe that. They grew up in a time and a place, they got into college in a time when it was much more competitive and much less accessible. So again, it's a way that they've learned to think about learning. I really believe it is and should be. I believe everyone should have an opportunity to keep on learning as long as they want to keep on learning. Whatever, whether it's in college or other places. Yes. Right. Yeah. Good. Thank you. I'll see you around, okay?
Thank you very much. A few things before you leave, please. A few things. You can step down. Thank you very much. All the conference sessions will be held in West Hall. Can you wait just for a minute? then please refer to the registration desk for information about the locations, as well as we have a guest account for internet. Please take the access account from the registration table. Also, tomorrow we have another keynote address, as well as the major sessions will be tomorrow. Thank you very much for staying, and bye-bye. And also there is a break, so benefit from it.